first of all, I noticed there are pretty much no theories of unconscious free will. So free will is what happens in conscious processes, to the extent that free will is different. My sense is people argue about free will, they're often using different definitions. And I've debated people and they're against and I'm for, or vice versa. But it turns out we agree on almost everything about how behavior happens. It's just whether it deserves the term free will. Regardless, I also would say that from my survey, almost all human behavior results from a combination of conscious and unconscious processes. Conscious processes themselves rest on unconscious processes. So your mastery of language, your understanding speech, all that occurs outside of consciousness. The brain hiding away in its hard shell, just getting electrical impulses, and from that it constructs an understanding of what the world is outside, what other people are saying, interprets them, and puts that our conscious experience is already interpreted by the time we have it. So consciousness rests on unconscious. One thing people use consciousness for is to overcome their unconscious biases. It was indeed going back to Freud and his idea of psychotherapy is that people are making themselves miserable because they don't realize the unconscious connections of why they react in this way. And if we could make those connections conscious, that was the point of psychoanalysis, to take these unconscious reactions, bring them up into consciousness, then the person could control them and could overcome them and live happily ever after. Now, how much this is true, and certainly psychotherapy has changed, but there's still something to that. And as people become conscious of these unconscious things, they become more able to exert control over them. And there's ample evidence that people are, once they become aware of biases and impulses and so on, that they can control them. Nevertheless, the unconscious is larger and more basic, and so that is always with us. There may be a few things that occur entirely outside of consciousness. Reflexes. The example my friend Marcella uses is the pupils dilate. The pupils in your eye when someone shines a light in there. That's not subject to conscious control. You can't prevent it. So what he says is, the unconscious is really operating the body a great deal and maintaining homeostasis and forming reactions and so on. It's just that when there's a conflict of two different possible ways to act, and a conflict that involves your muscles and bones, that's when it has to go into consciousness to resolve it. And that's the more basic kind of consciousness, the kind we share with other animals. Humans have the more advanced type, and I say nearly all theories of consciousness distinguish between the kind we share with other animals and the distinctively human kind, which is self-aware and processes things at abstract levels and is capable of thinking of principles and ideas, incorporating them into behavior. So the ability to do that, again, it rests on unconscious processes, but it is able to overcome them. The unconscious is very efficient. It's not very flexible. So it does simple things very well. Complex, unfamiliar, novel things, that's often when we have to resort to consciousness to do them. And then they become more automatic and gradually move down to the unconscious. One of the first papers I published when I went out on my own had to do with why people choke under pressure. And that's a paradox, because pressure means that it's really important to do well, that you want to do this one just right, and then you do badly precisely then. And why does that happen? Well, when you develop a skill, you practice something over and over again. And initially, say you're learning to hit the tennis ball or something, initially you pay attention to how you move your shoulders and how you hold the racket and how you position your feet and all that stuff. But as you practice it over and over again, it becomes automatic and moves out of consciousness, and then the conscious mind can focus on strategy. How do I trick the other person? How do I move them over to that side and hit the ball then to the other side? And you don't have to think about holding the racket. Under pressure, this is the most important shot. Then the mind thinks, oh my God, pay attention again. And it pours its attention back into consciousness, but that makes things unpredictable. Again, it undermines the skill. And so you perform badly precisely when you're trying to perform well. So that kind of interplay of conscious and unconscious, as I said, that's a destructive one. Mostly consciousness produces better effects. I think it's interesting is that that's the one where it intrudes most closely into actual muscle movements. So consciousness is much more advantageous when you're thinking about the distant future and I'll be sorry if I do this, or how does this apply now, or how can I seize this opportunity to make my life better in the long run, and not really focus on the details of how you move your fingers and how you move your feet. Clearly unconscious motives are there. How much people are affected by them, the evidence, with the studies of unconscious motives, it tends not to predict behavior all that well. It predicts other cognitions. So we show that people have associations in their minds that might reflect some kind of prejudice. But to me, the important question is, do they act on them? Just to say, oh, you're a racist or a sexist or something because you have an association. Well, you learn those from the world and from the mass media, everything. Everybody knows those thoughts and those stereotypes. The question is, do they inform your behavior? And if they don't change your behavior, well, that shows what the value and purpose of consciousness is. You might have the impulse or the initial reaction, but you say, well, no, that's not my values. That's not how I wish to act.